Welcome to the Idaho Explorer channel. In today's episode, we will drive east on US-30 from McCammon to Soda Springs and then southeast to Montpelier. We'll visit the towns of McCammon, Lava Hot Springs, Soda Springs, Georgetown, Bennington, and Montpelier. We will leave US-30 to do a side trip to magnificent Bear Lake. We'll visit Ovid, Paris, Bloomington, St. Charles, and Fish Haven. We will explore rivers, reservoirs, lakes, hills, and mountains along the way and take lots of photos. We'll stop at campgrounds and trailheads as well. Bear Lake and Alexander Reservoir are popular with boaters, campers, and anglers. The Portneuf River and Bear River are popular with anglers and campers. Unless otherwise indicated, all of the photos in this video are my personal photos. Please consult the Idaho A Climbing Guide website for more details on the driving, hiking, and property issues for the hills and peaks discussed in this video. It's a great free resource for hikers and climbers alike. Our adventure begins at exit 47 on I-15, where US-30 heads east, then southeast, all the way to Wyoming and beyond. Our first stop is just off US-30 to visit the town of McCammon, Idaho. McCammon has a population of 822 and sits at an elevation of 4783. It's located just a half-mile south of US-30. This is a photo of downtown McCammon. And here is the McCammon Rodeo Grounds in the center of town. Let's return to US-30. The highway follows the Portneuf River all the way to Lava Hot Springs. Drive east on US-30 to reach a bridge crossing of the Portneuf River. Just after the bridge crossing, turn left or west onto signed Old Oregon Trail Road at virtual mile marker 369.1, about 10.5 miles east of I-15. Peak 6616, shown in this photo, is an easy scramble from this road junction. Here's a profile of the peak from the east. Let's return to US-30 and head east for about 2 miles to reach Lava Hot Springs. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider subscribing to the channel and smashing the like button. That way the YouTube algorithm will show it to more Idaho lovers out there. Thanks very much for your support. Now back to the video. This is an aerial view of Lava Hot Springs from atop nearby Petticoat Peak, elevation 8,035. The hump in mid-ground is peak 5779. Lava Hot Springs has a population of about 380 and is quite a tourist attraction. The combination of hot springs, floating on the Portneuf River, a pool and water slides, and tourist shops downtown attracts visitors both young and old. It almost has an amusement park atmosphere. Here is a photo of the pool and water slides in early morning before the facility opened for the day. I returned later that day and it was wall-to-wall people. Just crazy. By the way, the mountain you see in the background is Mount Mo, elevation 6244. Here is a photo of downtown Lava Hot Springs on a crowded Friday afternoon. Just insane. Mount Mo sits just south of town and has a service road to near the summit. It's shown here as viewed from the west. You might also climb Peak 5779 on the north side of town. The aerial view of Lava Hot Springs shows Peak 5779 quite clearly. Many other mountains in this area can be reached via Old Highway 30, also called the Pebble Highway, which has a junction with US-30 just east of Lava Hot Springs and is well signed. Anglers seem to love the Portneuf River, which follows this highway. There's a BLM campground about 2 miles north of this junction. However, it lacks shade and is quite noisy due to the nearby highway and a very loud, busy set of train tracks nearby. These photos show peak 6623. Magnificent Petticoat Peak, elevation 8,035 feet, sits on the east side of the Pebble Highway, but due to private land, can only be reached from its east side via the Bancroft Highway. Petticoat Peak is stunning and is shown in these two photos. After passing its junction with the Pebble Highway, US-30 climbs for several miles to cross a pass and then drop down into the Gem Valley and continue its way east to Soda Springs. The pass has 3 peaks on its south side that are reachable from signed Fish Creek Road on the west side of the pass. These two photos show Peak 6500, which sits just above the pass on its south side. Its neighbor to the south, via a connecting ridge, Peak 6540, is shown here. Peak 6540 has a double-humped summit. Finally, here is Rocky Peak 6575. It's connected to Peak 6540 via a narrow ridge. After driving east from the pass down into the Gem Valley, you'll reach a junction with the Bancroft Highway, and from that junction you'll see Buckskin Mountain, elevation 6444, and shown here, sitting on the south side of the highway. Buckskin Mountain is on private land and is closed to the public. As you drive across broad Gem Valley, you'll see a series of hills to the left or to the northeast. These are the Soda Springs Hills and are relatively easy to climb. Let's explore a few of them. Leave the highway at the old town site of Alexander. This junction is about a mile east of the signed junction with Idaho 34. Drive up into Upper Valley on Windmill Flat Road and find these peaks. This photo shows Peak 6533. And here is Peak 6854. Peak 7017, shown here, is more challenging. It's a somewhat difficult bushwhack. Next up is Peak 6926, shown here. Finally, we have Long Ridge, elevation 6978, which is the northernmost high point on a long ridge. Let's return to US-30. About 2/10 of a mile farther east on the highway, you find Second Bridge Road heading south. You get a good look at Soda Point, elevation 7021, from this road. Soda Point is shown in these two photos. You can climb Soda Point from Second Bridge Road on BLM, then National Forest land, if you can cross the spillway at the west end of Alexander Reservoir. Let's continue a short distance east on US-30 to reach a nice viewpoint for Alexander Reservoir. The best public access to Alexander Reservoir is at the Oregon Trail Park and Marina along US-30. Here's the aging wooden signage along the highway. Let's take a few photos from the boat dock at this public park. This photo looks southwest across the reservoir with Soda Point in the distance. Here, we're looking directly south across the reservoir. In this photo, we look west along the reservoir's shoreline. And finally, we look east across the reservoir with Soda Springs in the distance. Alexander Reservoir is very popular with boaters, jet skiers, and anglers. Let's hop back on US-30 and continue our journey to Soda Springs and beyond. There are 2 interpretive signs just east of Soda Springs that discuss its past, and here they are. This is the welcome sign for the city of Soda Springs. The city is known as the Oregon Trail Oasis, as well as the home of the world's only captive geyser. Soda Springs, Idaho is a town with a population of 3,176. Soda Springs is known for its phosphate and sulfur mining, as well as its naturally carbonated mineral springs. You'll sometimes catch the smell of rotten eggs if you climb mountains in this area. That's called sulfur. Phosphate mining and phosphate plants are still operating in the Soda Springs area. This photo shows Soda Springs as viewed from the east on US-30. Here is an aerial view of Soda Springs from atop Peak 7128. The city is in the center and left center of the photo. You can see an active phosphate plant that is located about 3 miles north of town on Idaho 34 on the right side of the photo. You will see this signage at the city park in downtown Soda Springs. That sign is part of a mural that is painted on a wall that sits at the edge of the city park and just below the Caribou County Courthouse shown here. It's a very colorful mural. Yes, Soda Springs is the county seat for Caribou County, Idaho. Soda Springs is a full-service town with 2 grocery stores, a couple gas stations, a laundromat, and a good Forest Service office. This public park also has a map of the Oregon Trail Bear Lake Scenic Byway, of which we will travel much of today. While you're in Soda Springs, you might as well climb Chester Hill, elevation 6521, shown here in 2 separate photos. Now let's continue our trek on US-30 as we head southeast to Montpelier. As you drive southeast on US-30 out of Soda Springs, you're met with some magnificent mountains to the east. This is the Aspen Range, and I've spent a lot of time here exploring these beautiful peaks. About 4 miles southeast of Soda Springs, you'll see a signed junction for Sulphur Canyon Road. Let's drive just over a mile up this well-maintained road and snap a few photos. This is a photo of South Sulphur Benchmark, elevation 7,467, which dominates the scenery when you first leave the highway. Here is a photo of the same peak from a different angle. This shot was taken from just past an unsigned road junction at the convergence of South Sulphur Canyon, Middle Sulphur Canyon, and North Sulphur Canyon. This is Peak 7631, which is directly east of the same viewpoint. And finally, this is Peak 7389, which is directly northeast of the same spot. All 3 of these peaks are fun scrambles. Let's return to US-30. As you drive southeast toward Georgetown, our next stop, you can't help but be awestruck by the mountain range to the right or to the west. These are the Bear River Mountains. In this photo, you can see Soda Peak, elevation 8921, to the left, and Peak 8666 to the right. Just before you reach Georgetown's summit, leave the highway and drive northeast from a gravel pit area to reach Big Canyon Road, Forest Service Road 129. This road gives you access to the 2 peaks shown in this photo, Peak 8152 on the left and Peak 8093 on the right. Now let's return to US-30. Continue southeast on the highway to reach signed Georgetown Summit, which is about 3 miles northwest of Georgetown. There are 3 information plaques in a large pullout on the west side of the highway on the summit. This is the first one. It discusses the Oregon Trail. The second information plaque, shown here, discusses death, disease, and dust. The third information plaque is entitled 150 Long Days on the Trail. There are 3 hills near Georgetown summit that are worth exploring. You may need to get permission to climb the third hump. This is North Hill, elevation 6723, which is on state of Idaho land and can be climbed directly from the highway via an overgrown 2-track and a thick bushwhack to the top. Georgetown summit and US-30 are to the right of this photo. Avoid the private ranch in the foreground. Peak 6620, shown here, is the second peak that can be climbed. It sits southwest of North Hill and is across the Bear River. Maps show that you can scramble over to it using either a jeep road bridge or a railroad bridge to get there and remain on public land the entire way. Peak 6500 is about a mile south of Georgetown summit and is right alongside the highway. However, it's on posted private land. But the landowner lives right here along the highway. Please obtain permission before scrambling up this easy hill. Let's jump back on US-30. Drive another 2 miles to reach Georgetown, a town of about 510 residents. Here's the welcome sign along the highway. This is a view of Georgetown as you descend southeast on US-30 to enter the town. In the center of town, there's a small public park on the southeast corner of 4th Street alongside the highway. This town sign is there. There's also an informational sign about Georgetown's history, shown here. There are 2 stone memorials here. This is the first one. And here is the second memorial. Let's drive a short distance up 4th Street North to investigate some peaks in this area. Please note that this road is Georgetown Canyon Road and is soon labeled as Stringtown Road. This road separates the Aspen Range to the north from the Prius Range to the south. This photo shows East Hill, the summit hump is in dead center, at 7,314 feet. 3 Mile Peak, elevation 9215, is to the right or south of East Hill and is shown here. We will explore that peak shortly. Stay tuned. There are many more peaks that you can climb from either Georgetown Canyon Road or from Left-Hand Fork Road. For example, Peak 7551 and Peak 7885 sit behind East Hill and above the Right-Hand Fork Jeep Trail. Consult the IACG website for more details. Here is magnificent Peak 8786, visible to the northwest of Georgetown Canyon Road. Let's return to US-30 and cross to the southwest side of the highway to reach the Bear River and get photos of 2 nice humps there. Please be advised that both of these peaks are on posted private land. This is Peak 6470 as viewed from just across the bridge over the Bear River. And here is the old railroad bridge with Peak 6470 in the background. This is a photo of nearby Peak 6327. Let's find some peaks we can climb on public land. If you continue west to the village of Nownan, you can drive up Skinner Canyon Road, Forest Service Road 403, and climb Peak 7837, shown here. If you're even more ambitious and continue up Skinner Canyon Road, you can reach the south ridge of massive Sherman Peak, elevation 9684, and have an easy climb to the summit from there. Let's return to Georgetown, cross back over the Bear River, and take a photo of another hump, Peak 6290, shown here. Once we're back in Georgetown on US-30, drive about 3/4 of a mile southeast to signed Nownan Road, a nice paved road. we'll get a better shot of Peak 6290 from Nownan Road. It's shown here with the Bear River in the foreground. Just to the south of Peak 6290 is Peak 6620, shown here in its entirety. Please be advised that both Peak 6290 and Peak 6620 have private land issues to contend with. This photo looks up the north end of Peak 6620 as viewed from Nownan Road. Let's jump back on US 30. About 3 miles southeast of downtown Georgetown, turn east onto Crane Lane. Drive east on this well-maintained county road to get this shot of 3 Mile Peak to the left and Peak 9420 to the right. This is magnificent Bald Mountain, elevation 9248, as viewed from Crane Lane to its northwest. The summit hump is left of center. Let's drive southeast to Bennington to get a closer look at Bald Mountain. Here is the town sign for Bennington. I believe it's only on the northbound side of US 30. Bennington is a small hamlet with a population of about 100 based on recent estimates. Leave the highway and drive northeast up the main street, which is Bennington Canyon Road, to get another photo of Bald Mountain. This shot is from the southwest. The Bear Summit Hump is left of center in the distance. Let's return to Highway 30 and head southeast to Montpelier. It's only a few miles away. On the way to Montpelier, we get a nice view of the west face of Peak 8273, the high point on a lengthy ridge, shown here. Here's a view looking up the broad summit ridge that leads to the top of Peak 8273. Here is an aerial photo of Montpelier from atop Peak 8273. This is the Montpelier welcome sign on US 30 and US 89 west of town. Beware of bears. This is the slightly different Montpelier welcome sign as seen on US 89 up Montpelier Canyon. This one says nothing about bears, but says home of the National Oregon-California Trail Center. Speaking of which, what do we find at the north end of town? In the center of Montpelier on US 30, you see the large M for Montpelier on a nearby hillside, shown here. And you also see the Montpelier water tank, shown here. Let's take a short side trip up Montpelier Canyon on US 89 to do some exploring. We'll drive all the way up to Geneva Summit in about 9 miles. We first encounter signage for the Montpelier Wildlife Management Area before reaching the Caribou National Forest. Just over 4 miles up US 89, we reach the Montpelier Canyon Campground in the Caribou National Forest. This campground has a narrow campground road, lots of tall, thick brush, and a whole lot of noise from nearby US 89. Not a good place for a tent camper. It's also a very small campground. I think it has 10 sites. It offers some shade, but it's the only public campground between Montpelier and Geneva Summit. You can climb Sheep Creek Hills High Point, elevation 7826, from this campground, but it's an unforgiving steep bushwhack in miserable terrain. Trust me. Let's continue our drive up US 89 to Geneva Summit. From a large pullout on Geneva Summit, you can climb Peak 7575 to the north and Peak 7461 to the south. This photo shows US 89, Geneva Summit, Peak 7575 in center and right of center, and peak 7461, the hump left of center, from atop peak 7402. Speaking of peak 7402, it is shown here and is located southeast of Geneva Summit and is an easy scramble. Let's return to Montpelier. In downtown Montpelier, we encounter a junction with US 89 heading west. Let's leave US 30 and follow US 89 west then south to beautiful Bear Lake. This is our major side trip of the day. We'll drive all the way to Fish Haven, Idaho, which is about 24 miles away. We would be negligent to not visit Bear Lake, and US 30 won't get us there. In downtown Montpelier, heading west on US 89, you see the Montpelier Temple, shown here. About 3 miles west of Montpelier, US 89 crosses the Bear Lake Canal, shown here looking north. This is the Bear River as it initially comes out of Bear Lake and flows north. We soon reach a junction with Idaho 36 at the hamlet of Ovid. Here's a photo of the old Ovid School. Just across the highway from the Ovid School, we find these information plaques. This plaque discusses the Ovid town site. This plaque discusses the overland emigration routes. And this plaque discusses the history of Bear Lake County Transit. Ovid is very small, with a population of probably less than 100. Here's a look down the major street just off the highway. As we head south from Ovid down to Bear Lake and Fish Haven, please keep this National Forest map in mind. You can see Highway 89 on the left side of the map. From the highway junction in Ovid, drive south on US 89 for a short distance to reach Lanark Road. Drive west on Lanark Road to get this view of Midnight Mountain, elevation 9328, in the distance in the center of the photo. Let's return to US 89 and drive south briefly to reach the town of Paris, Idaho. And you thought Paris was only in France. Huh! Just north of Paris, in the distance, we can see both Paris Peak, elevation 9575 to the left, and North Paris Peak, elevation 9270 to the right, from the highway. Here is the Paris welcome sign on US 89. Paris has a population of 543. It's the county seat for Bear Lake County. Here's the Bear Lake County Courthouse in Paris. There is a memorial at the Bear Lake County Courthouse, shown in this photo. In downtown Paris, we find the beautiful Paris Tabernacle. And we find some historical signage about the Paris Tabernacle. We can also learn about the history of Paris, Idaho itself. Just south of Paris, along Highway 89, we find this historical marker for British settlers. Let's continue farther south on Highway 89. We soon enter the town of Bloomington, Idaho. Bloomington is a small town of 223 people. This is the town's stone welcome sign along southbound US 89. And here is downtown Bloomington, looking north on US 89. Bloomington Peak, elevation 9311, is the namesake peak in the Bloomington area. It can be easily approached via the well-maintained Bloomington Canyon Road, Forest Service Road 409. Follow this road west for about 10.5 miles to its junction with Telegraph Flat Road. Park here and climb the peak via the southeast spur and the east ridge, which goes at Class 2. This photo shows Bloomington Peak as viewed from the summit of Peak 9205 to its south. Speaking of Peak 9205, continue another mile on Forest Service Road 409 to reach the road's end at the Bloomington Lake trailhead. Climb rugged rocky Peak 9205, shown here, via a trail up to the West Ridge, and then scramble up the Class 3 ridge to the summit. Let's return to Bloomington and US 89. Farther south on US 89, we encounter this historical signage for Bear Lake. Bear Lake was originally named Black Bear Lake by Donald Mackenzie, a Scotsman and explorer. The name was later shortened to Bear Lake. About 4 miles south of Bloomington, we reach the turnoff for the Bear Lake State Park. Let's make a brief diversion to get some Bear Lake photos, as well as to get a look at Pine Spring Ridge and the Bear Lake Plateau. As we drive east on a paved road that crosses between the upper end of Bear Lake and the Bear Lake National Wildlife Refuge, which is a large marshy area, if we look to the northwest in the distance, we can see Paris Peak to the left and North Paris Peak to the right in the center of the photo. After about 3 miles, we reach a pumping station / power plant. The Bear Lake Canal, which we saw earlier on US 89 a few miles west of Montpelier, enters Bear Lake here. These photos look northwest and northeast at the canal from the roadway. Continuing east on the paved road, we soon pass the entrance station to Bear Lake State Park. The park is on the south side of the paved road. These two photos show the absolute madness of cars and people on the north shore of Bear Lake in the state park. It was a crazy Friday afternoon in summertime. Absolutely insane. The north side of the road is a complete contrast. It's the vast wetland that is the Bear Lake National Wildlife Refuge, shown here as we look northeast from the roadway. We can see the west face of the Bear Lake Plateau on the right side of this photo. Speaking of the Bear Lake Plateau, let's get a snapshot of Pine Spring Ridge, elevation 7878, shown here. So what does it look like up there on the ridge? Well, here you go, because I was up there a few years ago. And there are a few more peaks on the east side of Bear Lake, up on the plateau, that offered some stunning aerial views of Bear Lake. They're coming up. This is Peak 7207 as viewed from Pine Spring Ridge to its north. And here are two photos of Peak 7091. I took two magnificent photos of Bear Lake from the summit of Peak 7091. The first photo looks southwest across the lake. The second photo looks northwest across the upper end of the lake, kind of where we are right now. Let's return to US 89 on the west side of Bear Lake. We're back at the north end of the town of St. Charles. St. Charles, Idaho has a population of 196. The town is very proud of Gutzon Borglum, who was the American sculptor who designed and oversaw the creation of Mount Rushmore. Borglum was born in St. Charles in 1867. Here are the tributes to him in downtown St. Charles, just off US 89 and next to a Mormon church. If you're visiting St. Charles, you can scramble up several peaks to its west without much difficulty. This is Peak 7075. It's most easily climbed from Green Canyon Road. Here is its neighbor, Peak 6830. Unfortunately, this peak is on posted private land and is closed to the public. You can also head up Dry Canyon Road and climb Peak 7980 and Peak 8002. This photo shows Peak 7980 in mid-ground. Here's Peak 8002, its neighbor. Let's return to St. Charles and continue south on US 89 to Fish Haven. Fish Haven, Idaho is about 4 miles south of St. Charles. The small hamlet has a population of about 250. It's the final town in Idaho before US 89 crosses over into Utah. Here's a view of Fish Haven along US 89. And this is the Fish Haven Fire Station on US 89. This wraps up our side trip to the west side of Bear Lake. Now we can return to Montpelier and US 30 and then head back to McCammon and I-15 where our long journey began. Thanks for coming along with me on this multifaceted adventure. If you enjoy this type of content, please smash the like and subscribe buttons. Feel free to drop a comment if you've done some interesting driving or hiking in the state of Idaho. Stay tuned for more videos on the Idaho Explorer channel. Thanks very much for your support.